guys, and welcome to episode 133 of the OCDstories.com podcast. Now, before I get into introducing this week's guest, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you guys, because I don't think I do it enough. The podcast is still growing, which I'm deeply humbled by and grateful for, because I know it's reaching more people and hopefully positively affecting more people's lives. So thank you all for sharing it, for liking it on social media, however you've done it, or just listening to this. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and it's what kind of keeps me going and keep interviewing these great people. So thank you guys from wherever you are on this wonderful planet, and to any aliens listening. So the guest today is Kimberley Quinlan. Kimberley has been on the show a few times. I get her on because I just love who she is, and I'm a believer in you're the average of the 5 people you spend your most time with, and Kimberley's someone I want to put more in your eardrums, because I think she's a great influence. I think she's a very good therapist too. So in this episode we cover many topics. Kimberley and I agreed beforehand what we'd discuss. So there's a few varying topics, and I quite like that approach because everyone gets something out of it. So we talk about OCD and how that can affect sex life. And I think this is an important topic because it can do, and when sex life's affected, that can be very hard for some people. So I think it was an important question and topic to be addressed. We talk about OCD's relationship to social anxiety. I ask her about something she wrote, which is you can be scared and strong at the same time, and I really love that. So Kimberley unpacks that. We talk more about self-love and compassion, which come up before on our shows, and it's something that needs to be addressed more often. Again, self-love and acceptance and how to practice that. We talk about her Facebook support group, and also, she often shares this motto of you can do hard things. So I get her to explain that and share her views on it. And then I obviously ask her the sort of general questions. She talks about honoring your pain. So this is a very wide-ranging episode, but I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with Kimberley. I think there's a lot of information here that will hopefully help you. So without further ado, here is Kimberley. On today's show, I have Kimberley Quinlan. Kimberley is a licensed marriage and family therapist who treats people with OCD and related disorders, eating disorders, and body-focused repetitive disorders. She also runs her own podcast called Your Anxiety Toolkit, and if you've been listening to the show for a while, you've probably heard one of my episodes of Kimberley before. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you back on, and good to chat as always. So let's dive into this. Let's talk about sex. Throw that taboo topic out there. Just triggered about 5,000 people.
That's my favorite topic.
So how does OCD affect sex life? Someone's sex life?
It can affect it in multiple ways. I think specifically depending on the specific obsession. And so, like, if we were to pull a few apart, it can manifest in a multiple ways. So you can imagine if you had contamination obsessions, often when I see in my office is often a large degree of just absolute avoidance of sexual intimacy or expression of sexuality, or, as we can imagine, an increase in sort of washing and washing even around the genital areas. So in many cases, by the time I've seen them, they may have, rashes from multiple wiping, or, it can even become a medical issue when it's related to contamination. But I think where it really plays out can often be around subjects like sexual orientation, subtypes of OCD or obsessions, and relationship OCD, or any kind of fear of, having arousal with children. And so often what would happen is sex can become very ritualized. There becomes heavy placement of rules on how to engage in sex, how you're allowed to perform during sex, whether you have to or don't. And I'm sorry, this is sort of intimate conversations, but whether you're allowed to ejaculate and what that means. Mm-hmm. And what we often do is we place such meaning on these rituals, on what, and it's sort of like, I always say it's like a checklist. So if you get the rituals done, you get a sense of reassurance. Well then I can't be gay. Yeah. Or, well, then I can't hurt a child. If I'm aroused by an adult, phew, okay, I can't be a pedophile. And so it becomes a huge source of reassurance, or it can become a very ritualized activity.
Yeah. No, thank you. I mean, that's important to discuss. It's not something we've really addressed on this show before. So
right.
Hopefully that was useful to some people. And how does sort of anxiety generally affect someone's libido? Okay.
Well, first of all, we have to address the fact that a lot of medications do medically and physically affect our arousal. But if you're not on medication, absolutely anxiety can very much prevent what we call the sexual accelerator. So I've actually written a couple of articles around arousal related to anxiety. And ultimately, scientifically, what we understand is that inside of us, we have an arousal accelerator and we have an arousal brake, right? Yeah. The technical term is like this, it's more sympathetic and parasympathetic, but we have a brake and an accelerator. And when we have anxiety, what do? We clench up. We try to block thoughts, we try to block feelings, and automatically we will hit the arousal brakes, right? When we clench up, we do actually have that. Alternatively, we could say, if you're checking to see whether you're aroused by something, right? If your anxiety or your obsession involves us then to engage in a compulsion where we check for arousal, the act of checking for arousal, right, can actually cause deep in our brain an arousal accelerator, which is scary for those who have sexual obsessions, because the act of checking for arousal can make us aroused and can make us hit that automatic, out of our control sexual arousal accelerator. And now what do we have? We have more anxiety, because what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What does that mean about me, that I had a thought about a child? I checked for arousal and all of a sudden I see an accelerated arousal. Scary, right?
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. And is that similar to what some people call like the groinal response? Where you're paying attention to it, so therefore you feel an urge or a twitch or whatever it is.
Right. This is something actually that I'm really fairly strongly opinionated. So I'll disclaim that at the front end is, so when we talk about groinal response versus arousal, I think it can complicate those who have anxiety, because then we get into a conversation on what's groinal arousal versus what's a groinal response. And then we start to, again, analyze what the difference is. And, okay, if I have groinal response, well, phew, I'm just have OCD in air quotes. And so, yes, that's what I'm speaking about. But I actually just call it what it is, which is arousal, so that we don't compulsively try to get reassurance on what that means.
Yeah. No, good disclaimer and an important distinction. Okay, so sorry, go on.
No, all I was going to say is it will move. The truth is, unfortunately, even some of the listeners, as they hear this, may or may not, as we will, notice that you will have some groinal response or some changes. If I often sort of say to clients, if you look at my lamp or my plant, I want you to check in and see if you're aroused. Chances are they might be getting some stimulation down there. Does that mean that they're turned on by plants? We don't need to know. We don't need to know, but we just have to understand that neurologically we do have an accelerator and a brake, but it doesn't have to mean anything about our human nature and desires.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good. And send me links to those articles and I can add them to the show notes of this episode so anyone listening can read and find out more about that.
No, of course. I mean, again, when I say it's my personal opinion, it is science-based.
Yeah.
That's all coming. There's a really great book about the science of arousal called Come As You Are, which is kind of a pun on words.
CUM.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
But it's actually written by a Harvard sexual psychologist.
Okay, yeah. Okay, great. No, thank you for that. Okay, so next question is, I guess, what's OCD's relationship to social anxiety? So obviously anyone who's anxious, sometimes it's common to kind of then get socially anxious, whether that falls into the disorder category or it's just sort of a low level amount of anxiety. Is it more complicated than that?
I think it can be. I think that our first way of addressing it is the social anxiety secondary to the OCD, meaning that given that we live in a world where there is stigma, of course we're going to be embarrassed, right, about our compulsions, about our panic attacks, about how hard it is for us to exist with anxiety. So there's that. But it also can be that sometimes it's not secondary. It's just a second disorder that they have, that they, multiple of my clients will have both, right? That it's social anxiety has been there all their lives. But the good thing is, and the beauty of ERP, exposure and response prevention, is we can treat them both as if they were the same. Yeah. We use the same tools. We use the same, mindfulness exercises. The work is ultimately you have OCD, which is a fear of A, B, C, and D, whatever, fill in the blank. And then social anxiety is just the fear of judgment. And so our work is, okay, I'm afraid of judgment. What can I do to be judged? So, for example, let's say I've had a client many years ago who he purposely rubbed pepper, like cracked pepper in his teeth. Okay. Right. And as he did his exposures for OCD, he also tolerated the anxiety that people would judge him for having his teeth be, all blacked up. Right. And so the work is very, very similar.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess this somewhat links back to the sexual conversation just now. A friend messaged me today, and I'm not giving any names, so I guess I'm not breaking confidentiality, but I don't think he'd care anyway. But he's been getting stage fright recently. So it's something a lot of men face when they go to wee in the urinal, and the guys next to them or near them, sometimes there's a mental block and they can't seem to take a wee. And I want to say take a piss. I don't know why I'm not. Anyway, yeah. He just said, what advice do you have? And I just said, taking on graded exposure, I just said, regardless of how anxious you feel, just stand there until you go. If that means you stand there for 30 minutes, you stand there, but eventually your brain will kind of get it. And also I said, go in the middle cubicle, in the middle urinal. Right. What else? I said also, and if you're really struggling, lean over to the person next to you and just say, hey, I've got stage fright. Can you sing me a song? And if you really go on the attack, your brain will eventually quieten.
Yeah.
And that's something similar to social anxiety, right? Just doing what you're afraid of.
Absolutely. But I think that all I would add to that is, what we had put our attention on will be what we experience. So if you're only thinking about what other people are thinking about you, that's going to be your only experience. So what you might want to do is notice, what does the urinal smell like, and what does these sensations I'm having feel like, and just get in touch with the whole experience. You don't want to distract against your fear, but also get in touch with all the other things that are currently happening. What you just described is actually what they they use medically for people who actually can't go to the bathroom, right? So whether it's anxiety or real inability to go, that's the same tools that they would use. So absolutely. The only thing in addition to that I would add regarding social anxiety is to give yourself permission to be imperfect in this world, right? It's hard. It's a hard thing because the world is constantly telling us how we can be better, constantly trying to sell us things to be better. And so we have to still come back and challenge that I'm allowed to freak out and panic as long as I'm still doing and engaging in life. I'm allowed to be imperfect. I'm allowed to have an ugly cry if I need to have an ugly cry. I think that a big piece of the social anxiety for those who have just social anxiety or OCD and social anxiety is we just keep getting fed this idea that we're supposed to have anxiety, but we're supposed to make it look pretty.
Yeah, a really good point. It's okay to feel it and not have to hide it. Okay, no, that's good advice, and I'll let my friend know. Although I don't think you want to bring your attention to what it smells like in the men's toilets.
I know, but again, we have these beautiful five senses that we have with us, if, we can use at any time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe the sounds of the urinal, the sounds of the pee, splashing, or the sound of the flushing. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so you put on one of your posts, and I really like this, and you did it with a few, but I pulled out one, which is you can be both scared and strong at the same time. And I like this contradiction, and I just wondered if you could explain what you meant by that.
Right. This is something I'm so passionate about. And it really ties into what I was just talking about, that we have been trained to believe that we're only strong if we're not having anxiety. It's this if-then statement, like if I'm strong, then no one can see it, right? And I want to change that if-then to an and. You can be strong and have anxiety. It's not or. It's an and. You can be brave and be sobbing at the same time, right? Yeah. The bravest person in the room is the one who's got anxiety and doing it anyway. And so we have to remind ourselves of the and, particularly when we live in a world where we're being fed ors all the time. And what I mean by or is, you can be beautiful or not beautiful. They're your choices, right? You can be anxious or not anxious. Like if I talk about like my Instagram, I get at least 5 a day people on Instagram DMing me saying, I'm so weak. Why can't I do this?
Yeah.
Right. And I have to say, like, no, you're trying. Okay, so you have anxiety, but that's not the calculation to weakness. Someone's given you the wrong information. And I get a little political because I believe that it's somewhat the books and the stories and the cartoons and the nursery rhymes that we're told. We're constantly being surrounded by these messages that the big brave man shows up on a big knighted horse, and he saves the day. No, sometimes the hero is the guy who's freaking out and having a panic attack, but doing it anyway. So it is an and. You can be strong and anxious. You can be brave and sad, right, at the same time.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think the or, so you can either be scared or strong, is black and white thinking as well.
Right.
Which plays into OCD.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, especially on men, because definitely in the UK, I'm sure it's similar where you are, male suicide is one of the biggest killers of men under 40. And that shouldn't be the case. it's, I believe, as you said, politically, it's down to our stories that we were told growing up. Boys don't cry, men don't show fear or emotion. And that's just wrong. Some of the strongest people I've ever met, both female and male, have been the ones that can be utterly vulnerable. I said this on the last podcast, which I recorded literally 2 hours ago with Shiva. And I said one of the bravest things I've ever seen is someone doing an exposure who is literally shaking with fear, but refusing to give up and give in anyway to that. And that you could look at that and think, oh, that's weakness. She's having a lot of anxiety in that moment, he or she. But they're not giving up or giving in to the urge to do the compulsion. And there's something so vulnerable, but yet unbelievably strong about that. Right.
I can't agree more. And one, if you were talking about strength, if you were to add to that, the ones who are honest about how they feel, socially, that's, again, we've been taught that if you say that you're not okay, well, then you're weak, right? I just had this conversation with my husband last night. It's like, you say, how are you doing? You're expecting them to say, I'm good.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and if they don't say you're good, they don't even know how to respond half the time. They sort of get shell shocked and like, what? You're like, that's not the answer you're supposed to say. Since when were we asking questions and expected not to be honest? So yeah, if you're feeling your feelings and you're shaking and tears are rolling down, and then you can be honest about it, that's bravery. I commend anyone who can be honest about their struggles.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I always ask people in say the office environment, oh, how are you? Just expecting I'm fine, or I'm okay, or okay considering it's Monday. I hate that. Anyway, but yeah, the reality is it could be that I'm anxious today. But that's okay. Like, you'd never expect someone to say that to you, but if you did, I think that you'd respect them. You may be a bit shocked. Right. Not necessarily, I'm sure we wouldn't be, but a lot of people may be. But that's a real conversation, and the more people have that, I guess it makes it more okay for people to say when they're not okay.
Right, exactly. It's funny you say that, because I just interviewed someone for my podcast. It's actually a quite well-known politician about anxiety, and he was basically saying, like, as soon as you share it and you let other people know that you're having this struggle, they see you as the strong person. Yeah. Right? And then they start to feel like they have permission to go and share their story, right? And that all came from an and. Like, he gave himself permission to be a politician and have a mental health issue, right? Yeah. Like, it's incredible. It's just so brave, great work. And it came from right? Like, it came from that we can give ourselves permission, like, as a therapist. I'm a therapist, and I can fall apart when I need to, right? I can make space for both of those to exist. That doesn't make me bad. That just means that I'm a brave human who has feelings that are strong.
I absolutely agree with that. And I had a point. I've forgotten it now. Oh, it's a long night. It is nearly 11 p.m.
Oh my goodness.
I think that's such an important thing, and that was it. The Marianne Williamson quote, "What's your deepest fear?" That long quote ends by basically saying, "When we are liberated by our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others." And that politician being vulnerable, or you being vulnerable, that when you meet someone, they're in awe of that, because they only wish they had half of that courage to be so vulnerable and open. But when they see you as the example, they're more likely to go and do it themselves, because they'll be like, oh, Kimberley's done it and her life hasn't fallen apart. So maybe it's okay.
Right. I think often the rebuttal I get, I think it's important to mention. So, like, if I'm talking with a client about this, what's interesting is, let's say we have this long conversation about like, you can be brave and anxious.
Yeah.
And then you would assume that that would be the conversation, right? And we'd move on to the other topics of their life. But often what comes in is a sneaky or conversation again, which they'll say, oh no, that's only true because you're Australian, or that's only
Yeah.
true because you're privileged, or that's only true because you are a therapist. Like, we'll come up with another story to discount why everybody has the same ability to be strong and anxious, or sad and brave. And so I think it's important sometimes after we have those to just check in and be like, what limiting belief do I have about me that prevents me from still giving myself permission about being still brave? Right? It's so deeply ingrained. So I always say, like, just check the rebuttal to these conversations, because that's where the good information is.
Yeah, the deeper stuff that's stopping. Yeah, really good point. Okay, so you did an episode recently, I believe, on your podcast that dealt with anxiety-related exhaustion. And obviously when anxiety is coursing through your veins, or cortisol, whatever it is, it can be exhausting. So I guess what are some of the tips to kind of dealing with that anxiety-related exhaustion?
Well, I mean, that episode was actually a result of someone in my I have a Facebook group called CBT School Campus, and a couple of people within a few days had basically, they weren't really asking for advice. It's a really just a support community. It's not a therapy group, but there was constantly people saying, I'm not here for reassurance. I just want to vent. This sucks. It's so hard. I'm exhausted. And interestingly for me, I actually kind of was curious on why we were all having this parallel process, because I had noticed that I was incredibly overwhelmed with my workload. And I was repetitively saying to myself, I can't handle it. I can't handle it. I can't handle it. And so it made me realize that without me even knowing, this repetitious saying was being said in my mind. And so what my first piece of advice is to catch what the story we tell ourselves about our ability to handle exhaustion, right?
Yeah.
Because that is so much of the work. The truth is, anxiety is a full-time job on top of whatever life you have, right? It's a full-time job sometimes. And so consider it, how tired would you be if you had 2 40-hour jobs? You would be exhausted. But unfortunately, we can't stop working if you have a job or if you're at school, and we can't turn off anxiety. And so we can work towards, having a better life while having anxiety, absolutely. But my first point that I talk often about, and for myself, is just to catch my limiting belief or my theory or my story around whether I can handle it or not. Because when I check in, clients or people will say, like, they have the thought, I can't handle it, it's never going to get better. So just to catch that stuff, because then if we have those, that actually means we have 3 full-time jobs now, So that's the first step. But I think the second piece here is validating and non-judging our experience, right? You know my story about the second arrow, around judgment. I've talked about it before, I think, with you. I talk about it all the time, which is, life is hard, and that's the first arrow. But the second arrow is how much judgment we place on ourselves for our suffering. That's the second arrow, and that's the arrow we can work on. right? We can't prevent thoughts. We can't prevent feelings. We're going to have bad days. We're going to feel exhausted. But what we can do is we can reduce how hard we are on ourselves because it's exhausting. Just like I said before, we can honor that we're brave, right? We can honor that, having two jobs is actually kind of kick ass, if you don't mind me saying. That's incredible. That's like boss life. If you're doing that, you're a boss in my mind. And so I think it's interesting because I have a client who constantly tells everybody, I can't handle it. Right? That's the thing that stops him from doing anything. And I keep saying to him, but you're doing it.
Yeah.
You're telling yourself you can't, all while you're doing it. And I think that sometimes we have to recognize that, what we tell ourselves about our ability to cope is all wrong. So that's, in short, my most favorite tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's kind of changing that dialogue in your head, right? From one of, again, the second arrow of, the first arrow is you just feeling unbelievably anxious. You feel exhausted because of it. The second arrow is, why am I feeling this way? I'm such a loser. Life's too hard, etc., etc. Changing that second arrow to, I'm doing my best. It's not been easy, but I'm still putting one foot in front of the other. I'm reading X book or whatever it is. I'm making conversations with people, even though I'm scared to. It's, I guess, changing that dialogue to a more compassionate one.
Right. Yeah, I mean, of course, what I would like to always start with when it comes to exhaustion is coming from a place of self-care. Honoring that we, if you're working two jobs, you do need downtime and you do need playtime. I'm a huge advocate for the Healthy Mind Platter. I don't know if you know have you heard of the Healthy Mind Platter?
I haven't.
Oh, okay. This is actually like a whole podcast on its own. I really encourage you guys to go and check out Dan Siegel, who is an incredible medical doctor and does a lot of work in the psychology field. Back in the day, the United States government created the healthy food pyramid where they gave recommendations for food. Well, Dan Siegel and David Rock, two very incredible researchers, created what they call the Healthy Mind Platter. And ultimately what it is it's similar to the food pyramid, but it's for mental health. So they've divided it up onto the 7 most important things that you need to have in your day in order to live a life that will help defend against mental health issues. And I always print this out when I start with clients because while it won't solve their problems, it will help support them through recovery. Points like downtime and playtime, very important, playtime, right? When we're exhausted, a really great way to combat exhaustion is endorphins, right? Doing something that sparks you, makes you feel happy like a child. So, the Healthy Mind Platter includes playtime, like I said. Time in is another one, which is where you could journal or meditate or go to therapy, talk with, then there's connecting time, which is, talking with friends. And there's 7 points. I'm not going to go through all of them. Absolutely, if you just Google Healthy Mind Platter, it's a really quick, easy 2-page PDF that is just so good.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. And I completely agree. Like you said, it's not necessarily going to cure, to use that word, someone, but the ERP alone, if you've got all these bad habits, like you just stay in a room all day, don't see a single tree, and don't exercise, don't eat healthy, ERP is going to be less effective than if you have all those things, a good social life, etc.
Right.
Because we're holistic beings. We need many things.
Right, right. It's funny. I will say for clients of mine who are doing really great and they're transitioning out of treatment, um, often the ones who call me back to say, things are kind of getting out of hand, I'll do a quick check-in with them and they've completely stopped taking care of themselves.
Mm.
Not to say that's the reason that things went,
Yeah,
a little south,
it
but
doesn't
it's a
help.
part of the plan. It's a part when we're exhausted, when we're tired, when we're hungry, we're triggered. It's so
Mm.
easy to be triggered under those circumstances. So, yeah, I think mentally we have to check in on how we're the story we're telling ourselves about exhaustion, but physically we need to check in and make sure we're taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Okay, so
Mm.
next question, I think good segue is, I guess we've talked a lot about, radical self-acceptance, self-love, and compassion in past episodes we've done together. So I guess from your experience, what's new with self-love and self-compassion in terms of your world?
Oh, what's new with Kimberly is I am deeply into understanding people's checklist for worth.
Mm.
It's actually I'm in the early stages of writing a book about this.
Cool.
But what I have learned through just listening and observing clients, and also through my own personal psychology and therapy, and just observing the way that the world is that we are constantly tallying our self-worth as if it's a checklist. If I do A, B, C, and D, I'm a good person today,
Mm.
right? If I don't do A, but I do B, C, and D, I'm allowed to have something luxurious in my life, right? Like that we have these systems and we have these checklists and rules about what we deserve and what makes us worthy, and tallies us as human beings on how we feel about ourselves. And I think that when we can identify that checklist, right,
Yeah.
in ourselves, and the problem with the checklist is they sometimes change daily, right? So on a Monday, my checklist for my self-worth might be long, right? I have to get the kids to school, and I have to be a good mom, and I have to be a good therapist, and I have to get some kind of physical exercise in, and I have to be a good wife. Like, let's just say that was my checklist.
Yeah.
So that's Monday's checklist, but Tuesday I don't work. So my checklist is different. So how is it that my worth is different on Monday compared to Tuesday? That doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that as I talk with clients about self-compassion and radical self-acceptance, I love this topic. I'm so passionate about it. I've learned that in order for some people to get there, first they have to understand their own personal checklist and understand that it's just a story we tell ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Because if your list today has 5 things, but mine has 10 things, you know, does that mean you're less worthy than me?
Mm.
Absolutely not. It just meant that your criteria for worthiness is different to mine. And they're both irrational, right? Their
Yeah.
worth is a consistent thing. When we look at self-compassion and we look at radical self-acceptance, it's understanding that we are worthy of love and joy and compassion,
Yep.
disregarding what we got done today.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter what kind of money you make. We're all deserving and worthy of that. And so we can't keep punishing ourselves for what we haven't done.
Mm. Yeah.
So sorry, that's a long-winded conversation, but it's my thing, right? And I think that we do have to get to know the checklists
Yeah.
before we can challenge this stuff a little.
Yeah, no, I was just quiet because I think for me it resonates individually, because I'm someone who's quite and I think you can relate to this. I need to be doing things. I need to be progressing. I need to feel like I'm achieving. Kind of sometimes I wish I wasn't, but that seems to be how my brain is wired, or at least has become wired since my early 20s. Well, actually, in saying that, I think I became that way because I was trying to make a deficit because I felt less than. So I put everything into work, right? And now it's when I don't get everything ticked off, which I'm not a lot of the minute because I'm just so busy. I've found myself having to be more like accepting and allow myself, yeah, you haven't done it, but don't worry, you'll get to it at some point. The world's not going to end because you didn't do X, Y, and Z. You're not that important. And I don't mean that in a self-defeating way, but it's... and I think, for me, it's having to practice that self-compassion more of you're worthy regardless of what you get done today. But it's a tough thing to learn.
It is. And again, it's probably because it's multi-generational, right? It's you hit the nail on the head for my personal, mishigas too, to use Yiddish, which is ultimately productivity equals worth, right? And if we're stuck in that story that I'm worthy if I'm a productive human, well, there is no space for self-compassion. My ability to accept myself is based around what I get done today, right?
Yeah.
And that's where that's why I've really dug deep into this topic because, life happens and there'll be days where, things don't get done or nothing gets done. And we have to have practiced self-compassion enough so that we can catch that on the days where life happens and we can't get things done, right? So often I hear clients say that they feel terrible on vacation because they're supposed to be chilling on the beach, but their brain has only calculated worth and value if they're productive, right? And we can link this back to the first topic, which is like, let's go back to sex. Sometimes, often in OCD, our worth is connected to sex. And that's one of the pieces of the checklist. In social anxiety, our worth might be caught up in being liked by other people, right? Yeah. Well, both of those things are out of our control. There'll be days where sex doesn't work so well. There'll be days where somebody's in a mood and they don't like us. And so we have to start to see that we have to be unconditional in our acceptance of ourselves and not base it on the checklist.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to get political, I think that's a cultural thing. Definitely in my culture.
Right.
Yeah, you get...
and multi-generational.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't necessarily have a problem with capitalism, but I think that is a byproduct of capitalism. Of success is underpinned by money, and you usually get money through hard work / smart work. So yeah, if you're not earning, you're not as worthy. At least that's what I've picked up.
Right.
Yeah, interesting.
I love playing I Spy with this, right? So we can just I Spy worthiness. So you might be driving down the street. I actually have one. I'm looking at it right now out of my office. A big sign that basically the photo what it's showing us is if these men and they're all wearing very skimpy tops and they're muscular and they're tanned and they're sweating. And then it says underneath it, Coors Light. And ultimately what they're saying is if you've taken a run, you deserve a beer. Yeah, right?
Terrible advice.
Right. And it's great marketing because it makes you that feeling when you've worked hard and then you get to really relax into what quote unquote you deserve. Let's play I Spy with that. I encourage your listeners, open a magazine and I Spy diet culture or I Spy productivity bias or worthiness bias. It's everywhere. We're being fed this all the time. And again, this is where I want you just to acknowledge your checklist so that you can start to challenge the checklist.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of do this, do that, buy this, buy that, and then you'll be enough.
Right.
When the truth is you were enough the moment you came out of your birth mother.
Right.
Not to be
Right.
gross.
We're
But
not talking about sex, so
I was
let's
going to
just
say womb, but I've just done it. Um,
right. No,
so,
I agree.
yeah.
So I think, I've talked about self-compassion, but to answer your question, I think there is some additional work that we can, or exploration we can do to see what's prevented us from putting this into practice, to be able to access self-compassion.
Mm, absolutely. And I look forward to reading that book. And
Oh,
also,
it'll be a decade away, don't worry.
oh, nice. And interviewing you on it.
Well, again, I have barely told anyone about this concept, but it's something that, I have learned
Mm,
to be such an important component to treatment, because so often these beliefs end up affecting their ability to move forward in treatment.
yeah,
Right. Right.
absolutely.
I can't do these exposures because I have to work, or I can't give myself permission to rest because if I don't, A, B, and C will happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And
Yeah.
I interviewed Catherine Benfield. She lives in
Mm.
London here, and she talked about that. She did ERP. It was very successful for her. But she said before she could even do ERP, she had to do several, whatever it was, weeks or months on self-compassion, because she said,
Mm.
I just thought I was a horrible person and I didn't
Right.
deserve ERP. I didn't deserve recovery. So her therapist had
Right.
to work with her on that, just the worthiness, before she could even touch ERP. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly the case, right? It is exactly what, I agree. These are important things to consider as a bubble around ERP, because they keep affecting our ability to put it into practice,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, um, so you mentioned your Facebook group earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of it again?
It's called CBT School Campus.
Cool.
So cbtschool.com is the,
Courses and stuff.
yeah, but this is just a community
Yeah.
of, the Facebook group is just a community of like super sweet people.
Cool. Yeah, I'll put links to that, and obviously cbtschool.com in the show notes. But I guess, what are some of the common themes? You've been running this a little while now. Are there any common themes that come up? And you did mention one earlier, actually. But any others that come up in that group?
Um, well, the group is, I'm a member of so many OCD groups, and I
Yeah.
love the OCD groups that are out there. There are some, I know there are some that are really resource bases, and I just am so grateful for those people who facilitate those. My group, this group here, my group, the CBT School Campus group, tends to be more around support. And one of the more common themes so I'll give you two examples. So one end of a common thread is around my motto for my clients, which I drill into them, which is, it's a beautiful day to do hard things.
Yeah.
I try to post it as often as I remember, but it's a beautiful day to do hard things, right? Again, that's got a little bit of an and into it, like beautiful day and do hard things, right?
Yeah.
It's not a beautiful day because you don't have anything hard to do. So often people will post hard things that they're doing. So that's one thing I love. But in terms of questions, one of the most common questions is how to handle whether is it okay for me to give myself permission to treat this one thought the way that using mindfulness or ERP. So often people will say, they'll say something along the lines of, oh, I get how you need to expose yourself to germs if you have contamination, but I have harm OCD. So isn't that a little more important? Isn't that a little bit more scary or risky?
Yeah.
Or let's say they might say, I totally get how I'm supposed to be exposing myself, or I'm supposed to be practicing, mindfulness, but I keep having this tingling feeling in my groin. And isn't that evidence? So you could say it's somewhat reassurance. Like people, we don't give reassurance in the group, but I think it comes from this common thread that my obsession is a little bit more important than the other ones. Not that they're saying they're better, but mine should be treated a little more carefully, right? And that's no fault of the person. That's just how OCD tricks us into thinking that things are pretty risky here for you, and you better be a little bit more careful. And so that's often where, I love the comments, because people can catch that really well and say, uh-oh, it's not important, right? Like you've said, I know you've said in the past, like when you were on my podcast, you said the content of your thoughts are trash.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah. Well, I quoted Reed Wilson. I don't want to sound like I stole his work.
No, but that's exactly your advice, and his advice is exactly it. Is we can't treat one thought as more important or more risky than another. Right. And so that's a common question, I think, for anyone with OCD or anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah. And it goes to the whole, like, if contamination is your theme, or if I had religious OCD, it wouldn't bother me.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly. And obviously, if you had religious OCD, it would bother you because it's religious OCD.
Right.
Yeah, I think right. Everyone with OCD goes through that kind of thought process at some point.
Right. Yeah. I just lean into the riskiness, right? Yeah. Lean into the fear. Put your hand on your heart, right? And hold your heart as you take that risk, right? It's scary, but again, I think that's just one question. I think the biggest theme is just support. Which I think, again, is, go back to the healthy mind platter, it's an important component. Just feeling understood. Yeah. Just feeling like you have a everyone needs a family of people who get it, right? For anyone who's listening, you're welcome to join, but there's also some amazing Facebook groups as well that are very resource-based as well. So absolutely, that's a great resource for people who don't have therapy or therapists.
Absolutely. Join them all and find out which one works for you, or which ones.
Right.
Great. And my next question was actually, how do people do hard things?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, number one, I can guarantee you're already doing hard things. And so often I first start with, what are you doing that's hard, and what tools are working for you already? Often with clients, when I ask these questions, they'll tell me the most ridiculously cool stories about how they've done like crazy hard things in other areas. Like they've rode a bike across Canada, or you know what I mean? Or they've done these incredible things, or they've hiked up these amazing mountains, or, they went through the grief of a lost one, or they, were in a cast for 6 months in high school. And so I would first ask, how did you get through that? Because that's where your tools are. You've already gotten through hard things. And so most people, again, as I say, they've already got what they need. It's a matter of getting past their beliefs that it's supposed to be easy, that if they were braver, it would be easier, right? Second piece of advice is, it's allowed to be ugly, right? Here's an experiment, an exposure for everybody. Give yourself permission to go and have a good ugly cry. Right? Like, let it be ugly. We're talking about mucus down your face, like the real hardcore, because so often when we even cry to our loved ones, we're pulling it together and we're trying to make it look like we're good. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that way. I understand there are times where you can't have ugly cries. You don't want to do it at a staff meeting, maybe, I don't know. But still then I would say like it's okay if you do. So how do we do hard things? We give ourselves permission for it to be ugly, right?
Yeah.
We give ourselves permission for it to not look like it would in a Calvin Klein ad, right?
Yeah.
But the truth, I think the main point is, I actually just, someone had DM'd me this the other day, and I think I even did an Instagram story about it, which is, you have everything you need, right? It might be the stories you have about yourself that are in the way, right?
Yeah.
Again, I can't handle it. That's also a thought. That there's, just because you think you can't handle it doesn't mean there's a factual criteria for what you can and can't handle. You won't explode. I've never seen a client implode or melt because of anxiety. I'm waiting for the day, and when it happens, I will give everyone back their money. Right? Like, so I think it's mostly just addressing your stories. But I also have found it really helpful to follow Charla's great advice, which is the benefit of pulling your shoulders back.
Yeah.
Charla Nicely, incredible human being, is, pull your shoulders back and stand up really tall. It's incredible what that small shift can do to make you feel capable, right?
Yeah.
But even if you're pulling your shoulders back and you're crying, that's still okay, right?
Yeah.
Like steady, gentle, hand on your heart. I know I'm sorry, keep going on,
That's
but
good.
when things get, I know I've said this to you before, but I'll mention it again. When things get hard for me, my hand automatically goes onto my chest, right? I'm still standing up tall. I'm allowing myself to have my feelings, but I'm connecting to the fact that I'm honoring that my heart hurts.
Yeah.
Right? I'm honoring that and making a lot of space for the pain, right? The human pain that we all feel. And so I think it can also be a gentle touch to recognize that, I'm here with you. I see you. I honor you in this pain. But you have what you need.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't do that. I'm intrigued to try it because I feel that would be a good exercise and a reminder to sit with and allow and accept the displeasing and unpleasant emotions that I or anyone else may be feeling in that moment.
Right.
Because it's still a part of life that should be honoured and respected, and I guess the more we push it away, same with thoughts, the more we get of it, in theory.
Right. Yeah. And again, we've been trained that way, right?
Yeah.
Like, put a smile on your face, pull up your bootstraps, that kind of thing. That there's some truth to that. I think that's a real behavioral approach, which I'm a behavioral therapist. But we can get pretty calloused by just pulling up our bootstraps. If it feels so much better to pull up our bootstraps if we pull them up gently and kindly, metaphorically, and we don't tie them too tight, and we check in with ourselves, on whether we might need new shoes. You know what I mean? So I get that's a metaphor, but I think it's an important one to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So last question then is, if you could pick up the phone and call the 20-year-old Kimberley, what would you give that young lady in terms of advice? And was she still in Australia at this point?
Let me think. I was just coming to America. It was right after September 11.
Wow.
And there you go. I've just told everyone how old I am.
To say.
Which is totally fine. I totally own it. What would I tell her? I'd probably start crying if I start getting too deep into that, which is totally okay. I think would I tell her? See, I'm so used to your elevator question. I wasn't even considering that one. Okay, what would I tell my 20-year-old version? Well, just to sort of give some context, when I was 20, I'd newly moved to a new country, and I was all bushy-tailed and bright-eyed, but I was incredibly insecure about my identity, and I was in the very early stages of having an eating disorder. So I'd probably tell her that productivity doesn't equal your worth. There you go. That's the first one. But she wouldn't have listened to that. I think I would have told her to honor what comes up for her, I think is what I would really have needed to hear. Yeah. I think when we're young, when we're old, it's true for both, we get fed so many messages about what we should feel. And it's confusing as anything. It's so confusing to know what to feel. So often I'll say with clients, like, how are you doing? And they'll say, I don't know, what should I be feeling? And I just feel like our body has a way of showing up for us. Even if it shows up in OCD, that's not a bad thing. That's just your brain trying to protect you. And it sometimes makes a mistake. And so I think it's just sometimes honoring, lots of fear is showing up, or that person rubs you the wrong way. Just because everyone else likes them, honor how you feel. Honor that your body's telling you that person isn't right for you, or honor that what they're doing isn't right for you. So I think that's what I would tell them, because I think, again, socially, we get pretty trained on how we're supposed to be. And I'm at the point now where I'm like, screw that. Like, nobody gets to tell me how I'm supposed to feel and what I'm supposed to do. And I'm actually willing to break some rules now. So that's what I would tell her.
Yeah, love it. And is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you wish you could have shared on the show today?
I think, you've touched on the things that I'm actually really quite, feeling strongly about right now. I think the only thing I would add is just to reinforce that, the pain you're feeling is a human feeling. It's not evidence that something is wrong with you as a human. Just think of it as a little message, and don't buy into the messages because sometimes they're wrong, and just honor your pain. I think that's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, no, I love it. And as always, thank you for coming on and giving your time so generously. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I hope it's helpful. I do love, as you can tell, I could just keep on going.
Well, yeah, we only allocated about 45 minutes, so we've gone considerably over, which is good.
No, absolutely. The only thing I would add is something I'm really passionate about, just if you don't mind me sharing. Is in August, I will be releasing something I've been putting my heart into, which is an online course called ERP School.
Yeah.
ERP School will be an online course just to teach people how to apply ERP if they don't have access to a ERP therapist. So I don't mean to do that from a marketing standpoint. No, I really feel very passionate about giving people access to ERP who don't have it. And so that will be coming out mid-August.
Cool. All right, well, let me know and I can update the show notes. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Kimberley. And as I mentioned at the start, thank you so much for listening to the show. I really, really appreciate it. And quick disclaimer, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care, guys.